Well, hello, Bart. Welcome in our fourth podcast, Travel Health podcast by Care Plus. In honor, or maybe it's not really an honor, of World Mosquito Day coming up the 20th of August every year.
The Care Plus podcast by Travel Health Group with your host, Arnoud Aalbersberg.
Bart, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Well, my name is Bart Knols. I'm a medical entomologist by training, so I study bugs, and particularly bugs that transmit disease between humans. So mosquitoes is basically my field of research, and I hope that through my work I can contribute to solving some of the problems with these diseases around the world.
Yeah, and you have been doing that for quite a while now, right?
I'm taking 30 years.
30 years of research,
Yes.
Mosquitoes specifically?
Yeah, by far, mosquitoes, malaria, dengue. These are the two prime diseases that I've been working on.
Yeah, and I've been looking you up at YouTube. Very interesting videos of you there. And what strikes me is that you have such a refreshing approach to problems and problem solving. So that's the main reason why I would like to have you here. Mm-hmm. And you have helped us in many cases. And actually, we're doing some projects together in Uganda at the moment with printed mosquito nets. Maybe we can look at that later on. But yeah, it's World Mosquito Day. Why do we need a World Mosquito Day?
Yeah, I mean the history of World Mosquito Day itself is fascinating. It was the 20th of August 1897 when, for the first time, Sir Ronald Ross, he was an army surgeon, a British army surgeon working in India, saw the malaria parasite inside a mosquito, and that was the first time that we got some definitive proof that mosquitoes are actually engaged in the transmission of malaria. And from that time onwards, it was actually the notion that if you would protect yourself against mosquito bites, that you would protect yourself against malaria. And that was something that until that time we didn't know. So it was a massive discovery, that's one. And two, it was a discovery that changed the face of the political world, because suddenly now the British Empire could expand in all territories and have a much bigger impact on societies, because they knew that they could protect the colonial forces by simply controlling mosquitoes from biting them.
But controlling for mosquitoes biting is not that simple, is it?
No, but I mean, in the old days, when we first got the notion that mosquitoes are engaged in the transmission of all these diseases, it was mostly the physical barrier, putting a physical barrier between yourself and the mosquito, like thinking about screens and windows, these kind of things that were helping people to protect themselves against malaria.
But the mosquitoes were a nuisance much longer, because you're talking about screens. But mosquito nets, I read somewhere that they're more than thousands of years old.
Probably. I mean, the first time that was a mention of mosquito nets was 500 BC, so 500 before Christ. Herodotus, He actually wrote about the Egyptians using their nets during the day for fishing, and at night they were sleeping under the nets to protect themselves against the gnats, against the mosquitoes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because in Dutch we use the word klamboe, but apparently it's a Malaysian word. Is that correct? Kelambu?
Probably, I'm not sure.
Okay, I found that somewhere. So apparently in the Southeast Asian area that was a thing for a long time already.
Yes.
But it was apparently before we knew that malaria was transmitted by mosquitoes.
Correct.
Because that's only 100 years old, 120
correct.
years
I
old.
think it's primarily that people just wouldn't want to get bitten at night and be bothered by mosquitoes. So it was more
like a
like
nuisance.
The nuisance biting, and the disease was secondary in those days. But now we know better. Now we know much better. And as it is, I mean, the bat net, we've got a bat net on the table here. The bat net is still today one of the prime tools that we have for controlling malaria around the world. I mean, this is the tool. This is the tool that in the period 2000 to 2015 averted 7 million lives from people dying because they were sleeping under nets. They were protected. There's more than 700 million cases of malaria that were averted in that same period, and 70% of all that protection came from sleeping under insecticide-treated bed nets. So there is no doubt that the bed net has played a massive role in controlling malaria and probably will continue to do so for a long time to come.
But then it's very important that the people that need them get them, right?
It is one important that we make sure that people do get them in time, because generally speaking, a treated net will last for a maximum of 3 years, and then it should be replaced by a new one to have the optimum protection. And so you need to get your nets to the people in time. 2, you need to make sure that people are using the nets. And I think that there's where we are stumbling upon the becoming a victim of our own success. In some parts of Africa, malaria has gone down to such an extent that people don't see cases of malaria around them anymore. They don't see the children suffering that much, and as a result, they go like, well, it's pretty hot sleeping under a net. So why would I use it if there's no malaria? And getting the net there, making sure that people are using it and that they're not misusing it, so that they're not using it for fishing, or that they're using it as a bridal veil, or they're using it for for protecting the chickens. I mean, people are very ingenious when it gets to
that's what I saw on Zanzibar, unfortunately, last year. Yeah, that they used it as a fence to sort of fence off their home.
Correct.
It's not really used for protecting against mosquitoes. You were mentioning, just briefly for our listeners and viewers, impregnated nets. What is that exactly?
Like here in Europe, you can sleep under a net that doesn't have any insecticide on. I mean, because the risk of getting a disease through a bite is not an issue. Even when a mosquito would bite through the net if you're touching it with your arm or a leg or whatever. But in the tropics, that is an entirely different story, because a mosquito bite there might give you a disease that could potentially be life-threatening. So the addition of the insecticide in the yarn, so in the netting itself, which is now during the manufacturing stage of the net, this impregnation will make sure that 2 things happen. One is that the insecticide that is in the net will actually repel the mosquitoes, so it will stop them from actually landing on the net and trying to bite through it. And 2, that same effect, that repellent effect, makes sure that even if there are small holes in the net, that the mosquitoes will no longer fly in through these holes because of that repellent effect. Okay, and then for the mosquitoes that do actually land on the net, they will contact it and they will pick up insecticide, which will kill them afterwards. So that means that this killing effect will also mean that if your neighbor doesn't have a net, doesn't sleep under a net, but 80% of the people in the village do, that the 20% that doesn't use the net are going to get protection. So it's a community protective effect that you get through people sleeping under treated nets.
Yeah, and that was born somewhere in the 80s. Is that correct?
The sort of in the late 1980s, in the Gambia and West Africa, the first trial was done with 20,000 children involved in a trial. A lot of these children sleeping under treated nets, children sleeping under untreated nets. So there was a comparison, and children sleeping without nets. And then there was an astonishing result of some 60% reduction in the number of children dying when they were sleeping under treated nets. So that was actually the birth of the insecticide-treated net. Then after that, it took a few trials in other parts of Africa, in Kenya, in Tanzania, and the results of all these trials combined were so encouraging that the World Health Organization then started to promote it. And so through funding from the Global Fund and UNICEF, then we saw a massive increase in the production of treated nets and uptake in sub-Saharan Africa. So, I mean, I think we're now taking more than 2 billion nets that have been distributed so far in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's massive.
But annual demand is still massive as well, right?
It's still huge. I mean, let's not forget, 70% of all the malaria in the world we find in Africa south of the Sahara. The vast majority of that we just find in 4 countries. So that there are few parts in Africa: Nigeria, Uganda, DRC, Tanzania. So that there's few countries that have the majority of the problem in them. So if we have a strong focus on these countries, there's a lot to win there in bringing malaria down to lower numbers. Having said that, I think it is high time that we are having demonstrations in Africa that we can actually go down to 0 and keep it there. And that's where I think the big holy grail is, where everybody has that point on the horizon, and we don't have it yet. What is the package to go down to zero and to keep it there?
Yeah, but it's never one thing, is it? And like you said, if you don't go down to zero, it never goes away. Yesterday I had some new colleagues in the office. I made maybe the wrong comparison with antibiotics. If you have bacterial disease and the doctor prescribes antibiotics, and they always say you have to finish the course. And what everybody does, they feel better after 3 days, and they skip it.
Yes.
And which is actually very bad, because you sort of create resistance in the bacteria.
Yes.
And you will get ill again or worse. And basically it's the same with this issue.
There is no doubt that if you have whatever disease it is lingering on, there are still few cases. The pathogen is still there. That evolution sooner or later is going to catch up with you, and you lose the tool. So whether that's an insecticide or whether it's a drug, you're going to lose them because of resistance. So there is only one way in which we can sustainably get rid of these diseases, and that is to learn how to go down to zero and to keep it there. And I think what we see now, there's been a trial in southern province of Zambia. There's been a trial in the south of Mozambique, where for years they've been trying to go to zero by having a sort of an integrated package where we are doing mass drug administration. We treat everyone with antimalarials. We do indoor residual spraying with insecticide. We put people under bed nets so that we have the total package, and we see if we can eliminate. And both of these trials have not succeeded in going down to zero. They've gone down to really low levels, but they've not gone down to zero. So the question now becomes, what do we need to add to this package in order to go down to zero? And there are people that will argue, well, without a vaccine, we will never make it. Yeah. There are people that say, let's go back to the old and proven tools that we've used in other parts of the world, like larval source management, controlling the aquatic stages of the mosquitoes, which they didn't do in Zambia nor in Mozambique. And it might just be that if you add one of these old and proven tools, that you do hit the zero line, and you may be able to keep it there.
So that's the holy grail. And yes. You mentioned Ron Ross. He discovered it, and we're now 120 years later, and we're still not there.
I find it intriguing that Ronald Ross in 1902, so 5 years after he made the discovery, in 1902, which was also I think the year when he got the Nobel Prize for it, he wrote a book, Mosquito Brigades and How to Organize Them. And I can guarantee you that if you read this book today, that you're going to get more or less a blueprint as to what you should be doing in order to control mosquito-borne disease. Absolutely. It's a fantastic book. So that was written 118 years ago. And here we are today. We are looking into things like, how can we mine the genome of the malaria parasite in order to find new drug targets? How can we have libraries? How can we have robots running to give us a new insecticide? All of this research, but the old and proven stuff that is now almost 120 years old, we can learn so much
actual.
from that. Yes, it is.
And it sounds like a sort of a military approach.
It is definitely a top-down approach, and this is controversial, but I am a very strong believer of a top-down approach, because I don't believe that at the time when a disease is practically gone, that you're going to get society to back you to help you to go to zero. When people don't see it anymore, well, let's look at COVID. Let's look at Corona. This is exactly what we see now, even here in the Netherlands. When it's practically gone, when the government tells you that, the risk is now significantly less than a few months ago, then you lose everyone. And so the same thing applies to malaria. If people don't see it anymore, if it's hardly present, then having those same people help you to go down to zero, I just don't see that happening.
That's not a very positive message.
Well, the one thing that I would like to see is that there's one thing that you absolutely require, and that is community consent. So in other words, the community where you're going to control malaria, or the area where you're going to do this, people need to back you. People need to say, okay, go ahead and do this. Okay. And initially, if people want to join you, if people want to join forces and help you to get that malaria out of that place, then fine. But I would say never count on those communities to help you to go down to zero. It's just not going to happen.
But is that also a matter of knowledge that is lacking, or you already mentioned motivation? That's the problem? Because I'm a simple thinker. So I think if I tell you what the problem is and I tell you what you could do to help with the solution, you start nodding and you will do that, hopefully.
Yes, I think one of the key issues that we're facing when it gets to sub-Saharan Africa is that when people grow up, because in the very first day of life as a baby, you probably get your first injection of parasites through a mosquito bite.
Yeah.
And so what children do is as they grow older, they start building up some natural immunity to malaria. And that means that the chance of a child dying of malaria after the age of 5 is significantly reduced. You can still die of the disease, but your chance of dying is much, much, much smaller. And that means that I have friends, I have colleagues in Tanzania and Kenya. When they get malaria themselves, they pop a few paracetamols and that's it. They don't even need to take an anti-malarial drug. So living with malaria is relatively easy as an adult. Okay,
that sounds strange.
So what we do is we put this as a really high priority. I think the challenge that we face is for those countries to put the same level of priority in getting malaria out of the country as you and I want to do.
But then maybe that's a nice bridge here. What I see when I talk about this topic with my friends and colleagues, it still is some sort of a not in my backyard problem. Yes. And I think until the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation stepped up and put some funds in malaria prevention research and all that, nobody was caring. But now we see also other infectious diseases on the rise, and that they can come closer, right, to our backyard.
They do, and I think perhaps that may actually be, in inverted commas, a good thing, because like with Corona has hit us, and suddenly we have 140 vaccine targets on the table within a few months. So apparently
it's like a wake-up call.
It is a wake-up call. So apparently when something hits us here in the West, then suddenly we start investing a huge amount of money. I mean, there's more than 30 billion going into Corona vaccine research at the moment.
Hello.
And 2, we can do it very, very, very fast.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more than a handful of vaccine candidates already in a phase 3 trial stage, where normally we hear, well, this is going to take you 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
Okay, to bring a new vaccine or drug to the market. Apparently, we can do this much, much, much faster.
So there are some clever minds around, apparently.
Well, I've been asking questions about this. Like, Big Pharma always tells us it takes us 10 years to do this. And in order to recuperate our investment, we have to make the vaccine or the drug very expensive. Otherwise, when a patent expires a decade later, we never get our money back.
That's the marketing story.
That's the marketing story. And actually, that's a story that I teach my students. Okay, I always tell them the story. But now with COVID, it's suddenly like, okay, we can do this within months. That means either in terms of safety and scientific rigor, we just say, okay, we close an eye and we just go very fast. Or Big Pharma has always been telling us stories that are just not true. They can do it much faster than they claim.
Yeah.
So I would hope that we learn lessons when we talk about malaria or other mosquito-borne diseases, that hopefully this will also expedite the development of vaccines for these mosquito-borne diseases, and that we will do it faster. I mean, let's not forget, if we talk about malaria vaccines, it's less than a handful, and there's only a few that are actually in the field at the moment being tested. Whereas for COVID, I mean, there's now 140 being developed. I think this is
within months.
Within months, and I think this is. I mean, we started developing malaria vaccines in 1957. 1957, and we've got 2 out there at the moment. So I think this is an eye-opener for mankind. It should be an eye-opener for mankind.
Yeah, and so vaccines are very important also on the preventive side, but just briefly back to malaria, which is not in our backyard and is in poor countries, is that is Big Pharma at all interested in the end to work on that? Because can they make money?
I think they can, and I think it's not going to be that the individual that is going to have his or her child vaccinated in the Central African Republic, that person is not going to pay for the jabs. I mean, those injections will be paid for through the international community, through the Global Fund or UNICEF or WHO or the Gates Foundation. So I think very often what people do is they say, well, this kind of technology will never get a foothold in Africa because it's too expensive to use it there. And I don't think that's the case. I think if it's something that is really effective, if we would have, let's say, look at the yellow fever vaccine, one shot protection for life, almost complete protection, right? So it's probably the best vaccine we ever made. So that means that this is the ideal thing, and going forward with these kind of vaccines, there will be money. There will be money to use these vaccines. With yellow fever, it's the production issue, okay, because we need chicken eggs for it. But if we could produce a lot of yellow fever vaccine, I'm sure that would be international funding to get it distributed around the world, and so that we would nowhere have any outbreaks of yellow fever.
And where do you see in the going down to zero, what you mentioned, the vaccine as important part, or is that a smaller part? Because
who will say? I mean, I always get these questions. Like, if you combine larval control with bed nets, with indoor residual spraying, with good antimalarial drugs, with good diagnostics, whatever we have on the shelf, and I think the one thing that we should get rid of as soon as possible is to say, what was the contribution of this? What was the contribution of that? What was the contribution of this? Because it's going to be really hard to give answers to those questions. And as a result of that, we very often see that, you have your tool and you study it in country X, and you don't want anything else there. You don't want to interfere because you want to measure the impact of your tool. I'm in another country and I study my tool, and I don't want anybody else to interfere. Whereas perhaps if we would join forces and we would use your tool and my tool in country C, that perhaps we might go down to zero. So I think it's not which tool is better, which tool gives you what contribution. I think what we should be doing is we should say, okay, we are now in this ecological setting. This is how the transmission is. This is how the climate is in that particular setting. What is the optimum package that you and I can think of that we could deploy there to try and go down to zero and keep it there?
So it's like a supermarket shelf with solutions.
That's it.
And you pick whatever you need for that specific
That's it. So we learn
geographical area.
We learn how to eliminate. In Dutch, we moeten leren elimineren. We have to learn how to eliminate. And unfortunately, I see no places where we are really trying to do this. Nowhere in Africa do we really see this truly integrated program.
It's more like a holistic approach, right?
It's totally holistic. Yeah. And I think for Africa, where transmission is so intense, and in many places, Central Congo, perennial, all year round transmission, that we will require everything that we have on the shelf.
Cool. Let's take a short break and drink some water. This is exciting stuff. We'll be back in a second.
Care Plus Podcast by Travel Health Group.
We're back, and we just decided in a little break that we want to move not so far away, and let's stay in Europe, in the Western world. It's World Mosquito Day, and obviously there are other mosquitoes that can transmit other infectious diseases other than nuisance. So we had last year in the Netherlands some reports of Tiger Mosquitos being found in second-hand car tires. What's that all about?
Well, this is the story about the invasive mosquitoes coming to the Netherlands, arriving in the Netherlands now through actually 3 pathways. I mean, it used to be 2, but there's now 3. This is by used tires, so used tractor tires, airplane tires. They get refurbished or they get used for other purposes, and they're being traveled around the world in containers. Now, if, let's say, in country somewhere in Southeast Asia, there are these tires and they're lying around and it's raining, then they fill up with,
A puddle of water.
a puddle
yeah.
of rainwater, and mosquitoes, they come and they lay their eggs there. And when these tires dry out, that's when the eggs remain, and these eggs, they can survive for a long time in a dry condition.
Okay.
So if they are then being transported in containers, they come by sea, and then they are being transported to the companies here in the Netherlands that are working with these tires. And we put these tires outside. We get Dutch rainwater flooding these eggs, and the eggs, they hatch and they come out as exotic mosquitoes in the Netherlands. And this is something that is happening more and more often. So the second route is more or less similar, but then coming on small little plants. What are they called again? The lucky bamboo plants.
Okay.
And the lucky bamboo plants, they come from the south of China, and so that's how they end up here in the Netherlands.
But then the eggs are in the soil, or
They are on the small little plants that are being transported here. They lay them at the base of these plants, and that's how these eggs get here. Then here they're being flooded so that the lucky bamboo can actually grow, and that's when these eggs, they hatch and they turn into tiger mosquitoes. And this has been known since 2009, and this is something that actually before 2009, 2005. So we're talking 15 years. But every year, the number of times that this is happening is increasing, and the number of locations where this is happening is increasing.
so there's no learning here, because I guess you can check a container or put something in a container that,
certainly
that destroys the eggs.
That's
or
right.
something.
I mean so there is some legislation in the Netherlands as to what these importers should do. These tires, they should actually be under a roof. So if they don't get flooded, if there's no rainwater in them, then the eggs won't hatch. So then you don't have a problem. But this is legislation that cannot be enforced by the hand of the law. So it's basically useless.
Okay.
So those companies importing car tires, whatever they do, they can basically get away with it. And so every year we have these outbreaks of tiger mosquitoes, which in itself would not be an issue were it not for the fact that these are extremely good transmitters of a whole suite of viral diseases. These are really good transmitters of diseases. So that's basically a mosquito that you would not want to have in your backyard. And this is where the problem is happening in the third introduction route. The third introduction route is now that people that go on holiday like in Southern Europe, and they come back and they have their caravan or their camper or whatever, cars, where these mosquitoes that are active during the day, the tiger mosquitoes, they bite during the day, they follow you, they fly into the car or into the camper, and you transport them all the way back from France, southern France, all the way back to the Netherlands. And as it is, I mean, at the moment, the distribution of these mosquitoes in France is shocking. I mean, they are literally 100 something kilometers away from the Belgian border. So it will not take long before we will have these same mosquitoes standing at our border, and they will cross the borders because they don't recognize them, and then we have them in the Netherlands. And once we have established populations of these mosquitoes, that's when it will be a matter of time before we will have transmission of disease.
Yeah, because the tiger mosquito, as you mentioned, that's quite a tough one, right? It can survive easily in colder climates.
It is the number one insect, actually organism in the world, that it's the most invasive species in the world. So it is a mosquito that originates from Southeast Asia. That's why it's called the Asian tiger mosquito. But you find it now almost in every corner of the world. So through globalization, increase in trade and travel, this insect has found its way to most corners of the world.
And from your expertise and what you are doing, you mentioned this is already going on for more than 10 years with this lucky bamboo and importing of car tires. Do you see any governmental involvement here, or is it recognized, or are we just blunt and
it's just we have some policy guidelines. When we have an outbreak somewhere, it's being reported to the authorities, to the NVWA, and they will then come and inspect. They will then come and spray. I always wonder how they know what they should spray, because these mosquitoes, they may originate from anywhere in the world. They may be resistant to insecticides, and then you're just spraying for nothing.
And where do you stop spraying?
And where do you stop?
On the car park or the tire
It's very,
stores, or?
very difficult. With all due respect, I mean, so far, we have not had a population that has established itself. So these people have done a good job. They have managed to keep it under control. But with the frequency of incursions, the frequency of invasions that we see now, it is just going to be a matter of time before we lose the battle. And we have lost the battle once with another mosquito, with the sister of the tiger mosquito.
Okay.
And that mosquito has established itself in the province of Flevoland, and we are no longer controlling it. We are no longer trying to get rid of it. It is there. It is there. And so the minister has said, okay, well, the cat is out of the bag. It would be too expensive to control this mosquito, to try and get rid of it. So we will continue controlling it outside Flevoland, but not in Flevoland itself anymore, which I find a very strange thing in the first place. But so it's there, and that mosquito is capable of transmitting 11 different diseases.
Can you name a few just for people to relate to?
I think people will remember the Zika virus, which we had a few years ago, which
Brazil,
was a global pandemic of Zika virus.
Only for 1 year, by the way, which is also
it is still there, but it's no longer in the media. But it's still there, not in the same level, because herd immunity kicked in. Herd immunity, which we hear a lot about with Corona. And anyway, so Zika, but also Japanese encephalitis, which is a brain inflammation. Which we have dengue, we have West Nile virus. All of these nasty viruses that are there, that we already have.
All one species of mosquito that we have in Flevoland, in the Netherlands, that can transmit all those viruses potentially.
That's correct. And against none of these diseases do we have a vaccine, and against none of these diseases do we have specific medication. So basically, you get it, you have it. Okay, so it's like Corona. I sometimes maybe it even looks like for Corona we have some drugs now on the shelf, at least to take the life-threatening aspect of it, down. Yeah. But when we're talking about dengue, I mean, you can get people that get through a bite of a mosquito get the dengue virus, and it knocks them down for 8, 9, 10 months. More or less similar with what we see with some people that have Lyme or that have Corona, that they suffer from that infection for a very, very long time. And we don't really understand why that is. These may be genetic factors. But the point is, if you get a disease like that, it's going to have a big impact. And it's again an example where, we've always said, well, the chance that we will be hit by another SARS, another SARS we had in 2003. Yeah. The chance that we will get that is so small. It's so small. Why do we worry so much? And then it came.
Yeah.
And then it came.
We know what happened.
And now we've learned. So I hope that even though we always hear the same thing when we're talking about mosquito-borne diseases, it's always like, the chance that this will happen, so small. Why do you scare people so much? That's what I hear a lot. And now, hopefully, through Corona, I can make people understand that if we get hit by these mosquito-borne diseases, we're going to get similar trouble, and we just don't want that.
Yeah. So, the analogy between Corona and insect-borne diseases, and that it will happen, and not we only don't know when. That leaves also, I think, much more responsibility and maybe finally awareness with us as consumers, as inhabitants of European or North American part of the world. And so that's actually necessary, that we sort of re-evolve and say, okay, maybe we cannot control what's happening around us, but we can control what we can do. And if we stick with the mosquitoes for now and not with Corona, what are typical things we have to learn in and around our home in the next years? Or we should maybe doing it already, but
I think what we're going to see. Let's say if tomorrow West Nile virus would strike somewhere in the Netherlands, which is not a hypothetical scenario. I mean, West Nile is likely. It is in Germany. I mean, we find it in birds in Germany. So and birds, they fly long distance. So it could happen tomorrow. So what will we then do? What we will ask civilians to do in order to reduce the risk of such a virus spreading? I think a key thing is a message that we are always already giving to people in developing countries, is like, make sure that you have no standing water around the house. Has that worked? No, it's just not working. That strategy is just so hard to get into people's mind that they should.
They don't understand the question, or
no, people,
what is it?
No, people understand
the hassle.
People understand the risk. People understand that standing water is asking for trouble with mosquitoes and potentially dengue, particularly dengue. Mm-hmm. But the strategy in itself is just, it's just so hard. I mean, if you know the plastic soup story, mm-hmm. and I always talk, when we were talking about mosquito-borne diseases, mm-hmm. I talk about the plastic soup on land. It is the trash. It is all of the junk that is lying around the houses.
Empty cans, drinks,
buckets, paint cans, whatever is there lying around the house that can hold rainwater is all potential breeding sites for these mosquitoes. So,
and it's the smallest
it's
water, right?
The top of a beer bottle. I mean,
the top of a beer bottle. That's a breeding area.
That is can be a breeding site. So you need nothing, and so keeping that under control is a key strategy that we always hear through the World Health Organization. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of thing that people should do, and they should. And
so clean up.
Clean up is definitely good, generally in terms of public health.
Yes.
But for people to actually do it, I find it hard. It's really hard. You can have billboards. I've seen billboards in the Caribbean. Make sure that you clean up your place, and then you go to places and there's trash everywhere. So that's one strategy. The second strategy is actually based at the house itself, and that is make sure that the insect just can't get anywhere close to you. Okay, so that is the structural adjustments of your house, making sure that that you have the window screening, for instance, or door screening. The porch. Mm-hmm. The porch is the perfect example of how the U.S. got rid of its malaria. The porch in the southern states, so that people are no longer being bitten. The third strategy is then actually in the bedroom. So when you are at night, and we've got the bed net on the table here, mm-hmm. the insecticide-treated bed net is then your way to make sure that you have a peaceful sleep and that you don't get bitten and that you don't get disease.
So we need bed nets here in Europe, in North America, in our homes. If
we are going to be confronted with night-biting mosquitoes transmitting vector-borne disease, mosquito-borne diseases, then I think your nets are going to do very well in Europe. Yeah.
I saw yesterday, actually, I saw a picture of a family in Denmark, apparently also lots of mosquitoes, maybe not all transmitting diseases, but a big nuisance. And they had put up on the veranda, on the porch, they had put up a bed net outside because they said, we cannot sit outside yes. without it, which was strange for me because for me it's a bad product, but apparently it's
that's the porch. It's simply the porch. They've created a porch for themselves.
Yeah. Personal porch.
But this is what I foresee. I foresee a massive increase in products that are protecting people against mosquito bites, where I would warn straight away for the flurry of products that are absolutely shameless because they don't do anything.
I heard about an app that can protect me against mosquitoes.
Well, there it is. The app with the ultrasound, which people pay money for in the app store or whatever. The bracelets with citronella oil or whatever else they put in there. All of these products do absolutely nothing to protect people against mosquito-borne diseases or bites, for that matter. They just don't protect you at all. So I think what we need is two things. We need more and better products, and two, we need legislation that will push the rubbish out of the market. And I think that's where governments come in to say, give us the definitive proof that your product is actually protecting people against mosquitoes.
Like efficacy studies.
And if they don't, yeah, exactly. And if they don't, like any product that we bring to the market in developing countries is going through a rigorous process. Yeah. Getting a bed net onto the market as a company is not an easy thing to do. It will take you years because they're going to ask you for all sorts of data. And I think we should do the same thing when it gets to Holland and products on the European market.
Yeah.
Much more rigorous legislation.
Yeah, but again, it's also the habit of the people that they are looking for an easy way out. So instead of protecting themselves, for example, with topical repellents on exposed skin, if I tell them, if you put a button on your forehead, it will protect you, they will say, oh, great, so I don't have to use the repellent.
Yes.
And they immediately are open to try, and they don't even look at the efficacy data because they want an easy way out. So it's we as a company providing these products for nearly 30 years now find it really hard to tell that story, and also to convince people that there's so much rubbish on the market and myths.
Yes.
If you look at our Facebook site, there's a whole discussion now under one of our posts, and you know the story, but it's still there, unfortunately. You have to use vitamin B.
Yeah.
And I take it every day, and I never get bitten.
Yeah.
And then for us, as a sort of an expert, it's very difficult to go into argument with them, but because they think it works for them.
Yes.
But then I have to try to explain and say, look, maybe you have been bitten, but you don't have any allergic reactions.
Yes.
And that's not a problem here if it's a nuisance, but it's a big problem if you're bitten by an mosquito that can carry diseases.
Yes. So I mean, it's like again the analogy here with corona and hydroxychloroquine. I mean, it's
antimalarial,
which is an antimalarial, but I mean, I've taken that stuff for years. I've been taking chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine for years, and so, but it becomes dogmatic very quickly, and I think when it gets to products protecting yourself against mosquito bites, I think go to any product website, and the first thing you read is a whole long list of testimonials. And the testimonials, I think they're genuine. They may be genuine. But it's like, I'm going on a holiday this year, and I end up in the south of Portugal where it's bone dry, and there's no mosquitoes. Okay, and I'm wearing my bracelet, and I don't get bitten because there are simply no mosquitoes.
So it works.
So last year we were on the same camping, and it was raining, and there were oodles of mosquitoes, but I was not wearing my bracelet, and I was bitten to death. This year it's perfect because I've got my bracelet. No, this year it's perfect because there are no mosquitoes. But these people will go to these websites and they will write glorious testimonials.
So the next one will buy.
So the next one is going to buy the same bracelet, and I think that is something that is really hard to control, and perhaps the only way to control this is by having having the government say, does your product work? If not, you're not allowed to bring it on the market.
So switching to that briefly, you mentioned things you can do around the house, in the house, around your bedroom, and then there's the personal protection. For years and years, we have several active ingredients that have a certain protection time against mosquitoes. Do you see any sort of innovations there? Any? Because what I also see with our clientele is that they are also reluctant to use a repellent because they say, but I'm healthy, and why should I put on some stuff? And we try to make an analogy to sunscreens, which has taken us also a couple of decades to get in people's minds that it's useful to use a sunscreen if you're in the sun. But people are lazy and on the lookout on easy ways out. Have you seen any sort of innovations there or developments or?
Well, in terms of actives, there's very little. There's actually very little on the shelf. Let's be honest about this. And I think it's the formulation of the active that will determine the effectiveness of the product, because that will determine how slow or how fast you're losing it from the skin. And actually, that's also determining the price very often. But of the limited arsenal that we have, I mean, DEET is of course by far the most well known.
It's the oldest one, right?
1950s, and is used by more than 200 million people worldwide every year, with hardly any serious side effects reported. So, a really good product, and it does the job. There are some indications now that there may be resistance of populations of yellow fever mosquitoes in Florida against DEET.
But it's not they touch the product, right? So how can there be a resistance?
No, I mean, so that they break through the repellent effect. So normally it's just the vaporization of heat from your skin would keep the mosquitoes at bay, and now they just laugh at it and they just keep on flying and they land and they bite.
Okay, so we need something else.
So we do need something else. There's just recently this Notgatone, which is now suddenly approved by the EPA in the US. So we may see that as a product that is coming to market against more than just mosquitoes, also against ticks, against sandflies. So maybe that is the new one on the shelf, which is, it's a sesquiterpenoid compound. So it's a plant-based compound. You find it in cedar trees and you find it in grapefruits, which is not a surprise because terpenoid compounds are made by plants to keep insects away, because insects, they like to eat your fruit or they like to eat your leaves. So plants, they
protect themselves.
They protect themselves, and so therefore it's not a surprise that there's these terpenoids, these compounds that we talk about, that they have repellent properties, so that they can keep mosquitoes at bay. So maybe that is a new one that will come to market. I don't know. We have to see.
Okay, interesting stuff. And then maybe the last thing is that we are also always trying to repel and kill mosquitoes, but why don't we just attract them somewhere else that is more attractive than me? Is that not possible?
Well, I've just returned from the Maldives, as you know, and that's where we are actually trying at the moment to make an island mosquito-free. By using not the repellent part of the story, but the attraction part of the story. So we're using mosquito traps, large numbers of mosquito traps, baited with carbon dioxide, which we exhale, baited with lactic acid, which we produce on the skin. And so we mimic a human host with a trap, and we're seeing fantastic results.
But it should be more attractive than you. And if it's the same, like the carbon dioxide and the lactic acids.
Yeah, so actually a human being...
You have a secret ingredient?
No, there's no secret ingredient. Actually as it is, a human being will always be more attractive. Yeah. But if you're not there and in the middle of the jungle is that trap, then that trap is going to attract mosquitoes. I give you the catch of the day before yesterday on the second island that we're working on. I was 13,000 mosquitoes that we brought in a single day. That is very impressive. That is very impressive. And these are Asian tiger mosquitoes. This is the same mosquito that we're talking about that is flying around in Europe and France. And
I can have one of your traps and put it in my backyard.
In a few years' time, you will probably do that. As it is, the company that is producing these traps is doing mega business in France at the moment. Okay. Because of the problems with tiger mosquitoes in France. Yeah. Okay. And I think that's where Corona is helping, because people hear, these mosquitoes can transmit virus, and when people hear virus these days, they get scared. So I think they're willing to invest money in these
the word
traps.
of the year, unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay, awesome, Bart. Really great insights. Is there one thing you want to give our listeners and viewers as the thing they should bear in mind?
Well, I think I hope that people will start to understand that something that was always far away is no longer far away.
It's here.
The world is a village, and we're all neighbors these days. So if something happens on a market somewhere far away in China, it is with us within a few weeks. And when we're talking about our subject, when we're talking about mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases, it's not going to be very much different. So what we have to do is to learn that the word prevention is a valuable word. And that also means that if we have to put money in order to get prevention going and have optimal prevention, we should. Better invest now than solving all of the trouble afterwards.
Okay. Happy World Mosquito Day.
For you the same.
Thank you, Bart Knols. Do subscribe to our channels on Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, and YouTube.
Care Plus Podcast by Travel Health Group.